Hey everybody, welcome to episode 46 of the Go Get Outside podcast. This is your host, Jason Milligan. Welcome back. Welcome aboard. On today's show, we have the University of Central Florida's Outdoor Adventure Coordinator, Jenn Velie. She is a lifelong surfer and diver, and Erica and I met her at a park at UCF back in November, where she and I sat down to talk about scuba diving, surfing, the experiences she has had as an outdoor educator, and the effects that she has had on some of her students, including one in particular profound experience that she had. And amidst all that, we still found the time to talk about sharks and a diving mask half full with mucus. So without further ado, let's get to Jenn Velie.
So my name is Jenn Velie. Grew up in Florida. I've lived here most of my life. Love it, even though it can be extremely warm most of the year. I'm an avid surfer, so it makes it nice. I don't enjoy wearing a wetsuit, so that's why I'm not in California. But yeah, I grew up surfing my whole life with my father and still enjoy it to this day. And that kind of got me into the outdoor industry. When I went to school, I came to the University of Central Florida for my undergraduate work. Fell in love with other aspects of outdoor adventures through the outdoor adventure program at UCF and went off and made a career out of it. And I think that that's kind of helped define who I am today and just kind of having a respect for Mother Nature and enjoying what's left of it, I guess you could say, and taking advantage of traveling a lot throughout the year just to be ensured that I live my life to the fullest.
University of Central Florida, right?
Yes.
Was it ever considered University of Florida, Orlando?
No, it wasn't. Never University of Florida. We were never a Gator.
I'm just wondering because they had the opportunity to be UFO and they missed it.
That's a great beer. But no, never UFO. I'm trying to remember the name before it became University of Central Florida, but we are one of the newest universities in Florida, not nearly as old as Florida State or University of Florida.
So what part of Florida did you grow up at? Were you here in Orlando?
I wasn't. I was in Ormond Beach, Florida. Grew up maybe a block or two away from the beach, which is why I grew up surfing my whole life. And I would love to be closer to the beach, but it's a little bit more challenging to get jobs that close to the beach.
Florida's a funny place because I think depending on where you're from in the U.S., you have a very different idea from it. So for me, growing up in Louisiana in the South, Florida is considered like paradise. Like people along the southern coast think of Florida as like this place of amazing beaches. My mom has wanted to move us to Florida since I was a kid. She retired. Now they live in Florida. Elsewhere in the United States, places where Florida is not near them and they may have never visited, Florida is thought of as the crazy place where people eat people's faces off with bath salts. All the weird news comes from alligators, humidity. The other thing is like amusement parks.
Yes.
You didn't know you were going to have this opportunity. So now you have officially become the ambassador for Florida to the United States. So set the country straight right now.
Let's see. So yes, Florida's humid. There are a ton of alligators, which I feel like is what Florida is known for. Also the retirement communities, which again, I guess is part of the reason why politically it's a swing state when it comes to the election as well. It's unique. I feel like Florida is many different states combined. So you can go up to the Panhandle and have a completely different experience than the Keys, than Jacksonville area, than the Ocala National Forest area. And I feel like it's hard to kind of define Florida as one specific, whether ecosystem or a type of person that lives here. Like you said, it's either Disney or old people most of the time that people think that come down to retire, and humidity, which all of those things are fairly true. But we have, a lot of outdoor recreation here, which I think is lost in that because we don't have mountains here. So I think that's one thing, thinking people from Colorado, Utah, the Carolinas, where they do have seasons, which we do. They're just a little different. It might be like burning hot, slightly warm, a week of cold, and by cold I mean like 45, 50, and then burning hot again. So, there's a lot to offer here between the beaches. There's a lot of surfing, a lot of really good sea kayaking, scuba diving. There's some backpacking. It's flat. And there's a lot of wildlife here in Florida, too. We have one of the largest national forests in the country here in Florida. There's a lot to take advantage. Just individuals don't see that because they see the mouse ears and, think that that's all that Florida has to offer.
And then they hear the crazy bath salt stories.
Yes. Yeah, we are known for that as well. Yeah, it's unfortunate some of the things that do make the news, but there's a lot of wonderful people and diverse people, and I think that's one of the things that makes Florida so unique is the diversity of the state as a whole, which I think adds to the possibilities here.
I think people also forget how large it is. It's not quite the length of California, but it's fairly close. It still takes many hours to drive from tip to top. So there's a lot of opportunity for things to change along the path and ecosystems to change and communities to change.
Absolutely. Yeah, driving from Key West, all the way through the Panhandle through Tallahassee can take you quite a while. I've never driven all the way through Texas, but I can kind of relate to the lengthy drive from tip to tip of Florida. And like you said, you're going to go through everything from Miami, which is the hustle and bustle, through Ocala, where it's pretty rural, all the way through Tallahassee, College Town. So there's a lot going on here.
So you mentioned that you grew up surfing, right?
I did, yes.
So how did you get into that? What brought you out onto the beach and onto a surfboard?
My dad did. I think my mom was deathly afraid of my dad killing me out in the water, and she barely wanted to go down because she was afraid that he would come back with one less child than he went out there with. We lived so close to it. My dad grew up surfing and had a strong passion for it. And naturally, I went with him when he wanted to go and would bug him until he would take me, and grew up on a surfboard pretty much my whole life and fell in love with it.
So for people that don't live in areas with surfing, I think sometimes, much like their misconceptions of Florida, people think of surfers as like high hippies who just sit on boards and hang out in the waves and don't work and don't contribute to society.
Sure.
Tell us your
my experience with
surfing.
There's definitely those types of people that surf, but there's those types of people that do anything and everything out there. And I can speak to my experiences. A lot of successful businessmen and women that, or at least were in my community, very successful with businesses and worked hard in those businesses to be able to have an extra hour or two in the morning to surf. And I think one of the really respectable things about those people is they had a really good work-life balance. And I think that's one of the hard things for Americans today is perception is the more you work, the better you are at your job, which isn't necessarily that. And I think those people, and my father being one of those people, really paved that. You work really hard and you have the opportunity to enjoy your life as well. And I think that's kind of surfers. They're going to wake up. They're going to be the ones that are up at 5 o'clock in the morning for dawn patrol to, hit some of the waves before they have to go to work. And the clothes are hanging in the back of the car. They shower and into work they go with the salty hair, but they get the job done.
I think something that it seems like we're learning as a society now too is that no single experience makes you better at anything. So those people who devote all their time to their profession, they live inside a bubble separate from everything else. And it's really difficult to think differently or have new ideas or improve at something if you have no varied experiences outside of that. Taking that time to do something like be a surfer or do something else that breaks you away from that and lets you have varied experiences or new experiences, I think makes people better at their jobs.
Absolutely. And I think you'll see, too, that community gives back more than most other communities that I've ever seen with different cleanups. One of the things that I'm very passionate about is helping individuals that might have a mental or physical disability and giving them the opportunity to learn how to surf. And I think that that's very large in the culture of surfing is you have an experience when you're on the wave that is really hard to explain to someone that's never had that experience. And to be able to provide that for someone else just kind of warms your heart more than a job, more than, me giving a monetary donation to someone. The gift that I can give that person, the feeling that they have while they're on a wave is irreplaceable. I can't find that anywhere else personally.
So your father got you into surfing. Lots of fathers get their children into things and then their children grow out of those things, but this is something that has stayed with you. So what is it about it that continues to draw you to doing that? It's
an opportunity for you build a sense of community with individuals, but the feeling that you have, it's something that you have to work hard for. Paddling out when there's 5-6 foot swells is not the easiest thing to do. So not only is there a physical piece there, but there's also a mental piece of preparing yourself, one, but also being strong. Once you get through that break, and you have to work hard to then catch the wave. And once you're on that wave, it's almost like a weightless, just feeling like you're floating. And it's something that Mother Nature has formed that is, no one wave is the same. So you'll never have the same experience twice, which I think is rare to be able to have that type of experience, which has me constantly coming back to it. It's addicting in a sense to have that feeling and that peacefulness out there. You're by yourself on a wave. Hopefully someone doesn't cut you off, right? You're by yourself on that wave, and typically surfing with people that you enjoy being around and people that are like-minded as you.
So I know you grew up in this area, and you surfed a lot in this area, and you mentioned traveling. Have you done traveling specifically to surf at different locations?
I have done some. When I graduated from high school, my senior gift, I guess you could say, from my parents was a surf trip. We went to El Salvador for a week and went surfing. It was an amazing experience. I had never been out of the country before. I had never been specifically on a surf trip. So the surf aspect was, I was so excited about it, surfing in a new location, a different break. But, also the experience that I had from a cultural standpoint of really being able to see that how I lived in the United States or in Florida was not how everyone else lived in the world. And so it was a really eye-opening experience as well from that aspect. Went there, I've been to Brazil surfing as well, and I'm trying to think about California in the States. Hopefully another one on the horizon with my dad before he gets too old to be able to surf anymore. But it's awesome.
How did those locations differ from what you were used to here in Florida?
Locals. Brazil, it was challenging being a female. Wasn't seen as something that was typical in that area. And El Salvador we had the whole break to ourselves, which is rare, but it was the feeling of, okay, if something does happen, like, where is the closest hospital? What do we do in this situation? There's rocks, there's reef, there's, things that can hurt you a bit more than the sand in Florida. So you're constantly have that in the back of your mind of when, picking out the wave to catch, thinking of the repercussions of catching that wave. In California, of course, it's freezing. For us Floridians. So that was a unique experience, and wasn't used to the kelp. So the first time I wiped out on a wave there, I didn't know what was touching my legs.
Right.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of that. It made me a little apprehensive at first, but I always love my home break, but traveling, learning about the different surf cultures is always a neat experience.
California is notorious for breaks where outsiders are not welcome. Did you run across that, or was that blown out of proportion?
I think certain places are, and, knowing where you go before you go to those places, or going with locals. And I went with locals, so it worked out pretty well for me. But yeah, I think that's an important thing. It's just, it's similar here in parts of Florida, Hawaii. It's pretty similar everywhere you go, but just being respectful of the people that, call that break their home break, and asking questions if you don't know is, I would say, kind of your typical go-to for that.
So I find it interesting that the kelp freaked you out, because the other thing that we didn't mention that people think of when they think of Florida is that sharks are trying to devour you everywhere you go. Everywhere you look, there's either an alligator trying to eat you, or if you're near the ocean, there's a shark trying to eat you. So have you had any experiences with these sharks that people speculate are everywhere around you at all times?
It's true. Yes. Basically, people think the water in Florida will kill you. So freshwater, you've got the alligators, and saltwater, you've got sharks. I've had a couple experiences with them, but I've never been, knock on wood, bit by a shark. You see them depending on what the shark is. And, if you see one hanging out, lingering, we had a bull shark that was hanging out at our approach for a week or two. And it's like, we're not gonna surf here this week. But had a couple run-ins with them. But that's their home, and where they're visiting, and they're typically not trying to eat people. Most of the reports that people see on TV are by the inlets, which fish are going in and out of, and so the sharks are there feeding. Most of the bites are, I call it a nibble. I don't know if the people that got bit would consider it a nibble, but typically a limb is not lost. It requires some stitches and the person's ready to go again. So different types of shark bites you hear out in California, typically larger sharks, larger bites. But here in Florida, it's usually pretty small injuries that are caused from that. Very rare do you see a loss of life or limb from that as a result from that. And typically, I say typically, you don't see alligators out there, so that's pretty good. But if I did, I'd be gone. We've had a couple instances recently where they've seen them. Yeah, so, if I saw a gator out there, I would be back in.
And the gator's a little different. It might want to eat you.
Yeah, I'm not as keen on swimming around them as sharks.
It's interesting because when you said inlets and you mentioned fish coming in and out, and then had images of people standing in like an all-you-can-eat buffet, not around the buffet, but like within the food, because I guess to agree, that's kind of what you're doing. Like that's the shark's buffet, and then you're standing in the middle of their fried chicken platter or whatever, wondering why they're running into you.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to get into the way of someone trying to eat their dinner or their dessert. And that's typically, honestly, why I personally believe that there's not as many, again, loss of life or limb instances. They bite into the person and realize, oh, that's not what I was going after. I wanted, that fish over there.
So you glossed over it. You said, I've had a few run-ins.
Yes.
Which is like saying, oh, yeah, I went to outer space once, and then changing the subject. So why don't you tell us about at least one of these run-ins?
When I was working at UCF, I taught learn to surf trips to students quite a bit. And one of the times shortly after teaching that surf trip, we were out, me and a couple friends, and I was teaching them how to surf and was pushing someone in on a wave. And the water was very churned up. It had been really windy, so it wasn't clear at all. And I got hit in the side by one. Not bit or anything. It was just, you could tell it kind of didn't see me really.
Like it unintentionally ran into you?
Yeah. And
so it wasn't the snout that hit you necessarily?
It was. It kind of hit me in the ribs, and then its fin hit me in the side of my leg. Once it hit me and kind of turned, you could see it swim away. It startled me slightly. Went in after that.
That's an understatement, I'm sure.
Yeah, I squealed a little, but I didn't know what it was at the time until I saw it start swimming away. Just, what is that? And the person I was teaching how to surf, they're like, what was that? And I was like, oh, I just stepped on a crab. Let's go in. You don't want them to freak out. Yeah, we went in for the day.
You didn't think it was wise to, shark, and then just freak out?
It crossed my mind. But then I figured I'd probably freak myself out a little bit more, and by the time we got in, it would just be a mess. So didn't want to freak everyone out too much. Yeah, that was one of two instances. The second one was surfing with my dad at our local approach, and it was much more clear, and I looked down and there was a huge bull shark underneath us, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna paddle in. And Dad's like, why? Like, oh, there's a shark underneath us. So it was kind of where you hardly dip your tips of your fingers and your feet are up, like trying to get in as quickly as possible and not wipe out on the way in. And that was a shark that was hanging out for about a week and a half in the area, and we just let him do his thing. And
so it was just swimming beneath you in the water? Yeah,
and bull sharks are a little more aggressive, so that's why we went in. Those are typically the ones in Florida, if they do bite, that cause a little more injury. So we didn't want to mess around with that.
Yeah, and for California people, they might wonder, like, well, how do you see a shark beneath you? The water is very clear.
It can be here, yeah, and that's the weird thing I feel about Florida. The West Coast, typically the water is much more clear. It's much more protected. The East Coast could be very clear one day, and the next you couldn't see your hand a foot underneath the water. So some days it's extremely clear, and the next day it might not be. It just depends on the wind direction and where the kind of tides and everything's moving along.
And you mentioned teaching children to surf. So how did that come about? How did you start doing that?
Again, from my dad. I guess that's kind of where I got it from. He will be the guy that's down at the beach that will just go ask random people if they want to learn how to surf, which I always warn him has its dangers. Here comes this, old guy, hey, do you want to learn how to surf? But, he always gets to teach someone by doing that.
You just walk up to random people slathering each other with sunscreen?
With sunscreen. Typically, it's he likes... he'll teach anyone, especially with little kids. They watch you and they're like, oh, cool, I want to try it. And they're on their boogie boards. You see them try to stand up on a boogie board, and which is challenging.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. When I came to UCF, we offered Learn to Surf trips, and they had been outsourced by a company in Cocoa Beach. I was like, I've done this my whole life. I'd like to teach it. And so started teaching college students. But even, before that, I would help my dad teach friends and his friends' kids down at the beach. And you just kind of see them glow that first time they stand up on the board that they never thought that they'd be able to do. They just have this fuel. I want to do it again. I want to do it again. And it just kind of fuels my fire to continue teaching people. I want everyone to be able to experience that at least once.
You work with the university, so was that a direct translation from that into teaching at the university?
Yeah, I would say, I think that, is a piece. I love to teach. My office is just not in a classroom. I'm big on the experiential education aspect of things. And, I think there's a lot that people can learn from themselves and from an experience like that. Yeah, I think it directly relates to what I do now and why I love doing what I do. If I could teach people how to surf all day, every day, it would be a pretty awesome gig.
So explain to us what that is you do.
I work at the University of Central Florida as the Outdoor Adventure Coordinator. I manage a trips program. We take UCF students anywhere from 50 to 60 trips per year, ranging from surfing, like a day trip, to week-long kind of expeditions. We also have a couple different aspects of the program. We manage the lakefront facility here that we're sitting at, as well as a rock climbing wall, a challenge course, an equipment rental center. We do special clinics and other programming. Most of the time, I would say our classroom is outside and teaching different skills, whether it's basic, someone that's never been camping ever in their entire life, of this is how you put up a tent, this is how you cook, this is how you poop in the woods kind of situation, to people that have some experience in helping them learn how to navigate, orienteer, things like that.
Are you managing more of a club, or do people take specific courses for a semester and each day they come in and they're working on these outdoor activities?
I would love for it to be an academic program, and I think myself and one of my colleagues is trying to get to that point where UCF does have an academic program. That would be a vision of ours. It's actually a program within the university, so like intramural sports. Students can sign up for things. Most of our services are free for UCF students because of their tuition that they pay. We help subsidize and offset that. Our trips are extremely inexpensive. So you look at it, maybe a learn to surf trip, it's $15. It includes their transportation, their lessons, their surfboard, pretty much everything except for their lunch.
Yeah, that's extremely inexpensive, because I want to say on average that's $120 or so if you went to a beach and signed up for learn to surf lessons.
Absolutely.
So $15 is quite a big difference.
Yeah, it is. And we want to be able to offer it to students at a reduced price because we want them to be able to have the opportunity while they're here. Especially in Florida, we have a lot of out-of-state students too that come, and it's, something, again, you hear the shark stories, and we have pre-trip meetings before our trips, and it's like, well, there's sharks. Yeah, there are sharks. But you don't mess with them, and they don't typically mess with us, kind of situation.
I mean, one of the things I talk about on this show a lot, and so I'll do it again now, is how, as a society, we had all these different things as we progressed throughout time that were dangerous. And so we figured out ways to deal with these dangers, whether it be wolves or nature or weather or whatever. And we became so good at managing those dangers that we sort of eradicated them from our immediate life. So much so that now we fear them to such a degree that isn't representative of the dangers they actually pose.
Right.
And so one of the things I think that's great about programs like this is exactly what you just said about people come in and they have this fear of sharks or something that's sort of unfounded, and then introducing them to the reality of that and kind of learning to incorporate those elements that we've lost that are inherent to our existence that are still important.
Yeah, and I think, that kind of goes, I think we've lost a lot of our instinct because we have everything handed to us, whether it's electricity or shelter or means of transportation. And I think, getting people outside kind of reinstates that instinct, that natural instinct of, okay, well, how do you know if there's been a bear in the area, and how do you handle that? Whereas instead of, okay, we're going to kill bears that get within an X amount of range, or we're going to have a hunt so we minimize the number of bears here. Instead, I think going out on these trips helps students understand that they are important to the ecosystem and how they have a direct effect on us and how we handle being around them. And it's been neat to see the students, not necessarily, and there's a healthy fear of animals that can really hurt us, but I think it helps them have a good understanding of why they're like that. Why does a bear attack? Oh, okay, because it has 3 cubs sitting right there, and you're too close to them. And so I don't think people really understand that until they're out there and experience it.
Right. I think a lot of people think that there are these predatory animals that are just seeking to injure things,
Yes.
but they forget that we are also predatory animals. Right. We don't spend all our time just trying to kill most of us,
yeah.
don't spend all our time just going around trying to kill things. And so these animals aren't doing that either. And like you said, they're part of the ecosystem. There are benefits in certain cases of there being a bear somewhere. That bear helps manage that ecosystem just like the other creatures and the humans can help manage that ecosystem. You were mentioning like electricity and things like that. And one of the great things about us having developed these things and base survival not being something we have to worry about every day is it opens us up to create new things, to think about different ways to expand our societies, to create art, to share whatever with other people so that we can be more than just creatures trying to survive. But there's a great need also for reintroducing those base survival scenarios and showing someone, when you go live outside, this is what it's like. This is what society is doing for you.
Right. Yeah. It helps, I think, give students or just people in general that go out an appreciation for what they have. And we've started looking at doing some more international travel because I think, and I was guilty of this, being stuck in that bubble until I traveled to El Salvador of, everyone has this, and it's not the case. And I think, a lot of times we have natural disasters there, an awful thing that happens, and a lot of people lose, whether it's life or very important possessions that they do have. You'll see here when Hurricane Matthew came, you have people that don't know what to do. Their instincts are gone. Like, how am I going to, I don't have service on my cell phone. What am I going to do? Or how am I going to eat when, McDonald's is closed? So the instinct of, okay, you still have fire, you still have a propane stove, you have these things is kind of lost. And it was kind of neat because we did just recently have, the hurricane, and we had a lot of our students and other students that had gone on trips asking questions about the propane stoves and, okay, how long does the gas last and how do we ration that? And, okay, how long do I need to boil water for it to be safe and things like that, which you have to do in the backcountry. So it's kind of neat to see the students that have gone through our program, hundreds of other outdoor programs, or even had just an outdoor experience, they understand that and they get that, which is pretty neat to kind of see some of those instincts come back when things like that do happen.
Let's talk about that some more. Let's talk about the sort of changes that you get to see in some of these students, because you mentioned people come in and sometimes they have no experience whatsoever, or they have an unfounded fear, and taking them surfing, taking them outdoors can help in a lot of ways that I don't think people realize develop these aspects of a person and build this confidence and other things that maybe people don't realize is going to be a byproduct. So what sort of changes have you seen in people?
I think one of the biggest things that we see here is a sense of community. I think a lot of that's lost with people being on their cell phones. So if you this is a huge campus. We have 63,000 students at UCF. And you could look, during any time when there's a class change and everyone's nose is in their phone. And we typically don't allow phones on our trips. If we do, there has to be kind of a circumstance for it. Most of the time, hopefully they don't have service if they do have it. But it provides them the ability to have a conversation with the person next to them, which I think is something that has been lost. It's not just, hey, how's the weather? Okay, and move on. But if you're backpacking for 8 hours in a day, you learn how to have those conversations with people and learn more about someone else. And we had a backpacking trip maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, and it's been neat to see the students from that trip that are still in touch with each other. They hang out. None of them knew each other beforehand. And it's just really neat to see them build that sense of community, which I think is lost. When they're in a classroom, they're listening. They're not typically having dialogue with each other during that. And again, when they're walking on and off campus, they're in their phones a lot, social media being, having such a huge presence. So I'd say that's one of the biggest aspects, and people learning about themselves. I never thought that I'd ever be able to sleep outside. I was afraid of bears and all these spiders and bugs, and I never thought I could survive outside. And we see that a lot with, students in Florida. They don't typically recreate outside where you might see, people in Colorado, it's hikes or skiing, things are a little more natural out there. So I say there's kind of a list of 100 things easily that they kind of bring back from that. But I think that's kind of one of the biggest thing is they learn a lot about a little bit more of who they are. They have time to reflect. There's, in today's world, you go home, you turn on the TV or you cook and then you go to bed, you do homework, whatever that order might be for you, but there is no TV to turn on. There's people to have conversation with, or alone time for you to have to process how your day was, or, hey, what do I want to do with my life? And who do I want to become? And they have time to think that through.
You don't need to mention any names, but are there any particular people that come to mind where you think, when this person came here and the last time I saw this person was drastically different?
Yeah, we've had plenty of students that have first timer on a trip and like, man, this is gonna be rough. This is gonna be challenging for us to help manage this person. Fourth, fifth trip that they come back to, they're the person that's helping. It's like, hey, why don't you start the stoves or teach people how to pack their pack? So we've seen tremendous growth, and a lot of students do continue coming back. We don't typically see many students that just come and do one trip and then stop. But I can think of quite a few off the top of my head, from a first experience to fifth, sixth experience, staff included, that there's just tremendous growth of them with hard skills and even just soft skills as well. I had a student on a week-long trip when I was at Georgia Southern University that during the pre-trip I was like, oh no, what have we gotten ourselves into? And by the end of the trip, it was just, they were a remarkable person to hang out with, and the changes that they went through during that trip, I wish I could have documented it all. So someone from the outside could really see what that experience did for that person. And it, they went from not wanting to talk to anyone and, wanting to do their own thing, not pulling their weight, to not necessarily getting along with other people. And just kind of a 180 towards the end of the trip of really being into it, loving it, wanting to teach people about things that they had learned throughout the trip. So it was an awesome experience, something that we thought, man, this is going to be challenging for us, which is good. It's great to have kind of those challenges, but it felt even better at the end of the trip to see what that person went through and the changes that they went through on the trip.
I mean, the nice thing about that too is it may seem like a small thing that you do, taking them out on some trip like this or something, but a person that changes that much on that trip, perhaps a switch went off and that person has now changed or began the process of changing in that positive direction outside of that. And so you may have helped make that person a better member of society.
Absolutely. We had, I can think of one student in particular that, again, a week-long trip. And typically you'll see more transformation on a week-long trip. You have more time with them. Right. But I'll never forget, we were on a backpacking trip, and we were on a lookout spot and just sitting and chatting. The individual handed me a piece of paper, and it was a suicide note. And she's like, I don't need this anymore. And she's like, wow, this has given me a whole new perspective on life and just how kind people can be. And, it was a experience for me of like, wow, this literally changed this person's life. And, you're not going to see that with every person that goes on a trip. And every person's not going to have that same experience. But to know that what you're doing made that kind of impact on that one student was pretty significant and heartfelt of like, wow, that's awesome. Saw that student many other times, and now they are doing so well and actually have created a name for themselves in their industry based on their outdoor experience, and still do a lot of things in the outdoors. So it's pretty cool to see that impact. Yeah.
So what was that like? Because that's a weighty thing to be handed.
I wasn't sure at first when she handed it to me. I was like, is this like, you're giving me this now and like what is this? And then she said, I don't need this anymore. You can get rid of it. And I was like, okay. Was
it only later that you read it that you understood, or did you immediately?
She didn't want me to read it, but it was something that we burned together that night in a fire, and she wanted me to hang on until that point. And she's like, you don't need to read it. So I didn't read it. But basically she told me a little bit about it, and we talked a little bit through later that evening through some of the stuff that she wanted to talk about. So yeah, it was a very real experience of, wow, could this have happened on our trip? If this is how awful this person was feeling about where they were in life, it just kind of opens your eyes a little bit more to some of the things that people might be going through.
That's a great story, because I don't think that's one of those things that would come to mind for most people that, you take some people backpacking, you take some people camping, and maybe you could impact someone so much that they no longer want to kill themselves.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You don't think that. And I think it's hard for the individual that hasn't had these types of experiences that, don't live a life outside like we do to fully understand, as I wouldn't with someone having other experiences. But, it's one way for us to tell our story of, we're not in a classroom. We're not teaching you arithmetic that is on a whiteboard or whatever they use nowadays.
Yeah,
Chalkboard, whiteboard, I don't really know. It's an experience where they're using those skills, whether it's to weigh out and ration food or how much fuel they're using. They're still using those skills and learning those skills. It's just in a different sense. And, it's hard for us to explain our story and how that works unless someone actually goes on a trip and experiences opportunity for themselves. But yeah, hers is a great story, and I mean, it could have been a really awful thing for me to have to tell if that hadn't happened. Right. But yeah, it's a great story with a wonderful ending.
At one point, I was going to ask you what keeps you wanting to teach people things, and I think it's kind of been answered already. I think it's probably moments like that where you see the change that you can help foster in another person. Other than that, are there other things that make you say, yeah, this is the right path for me, this is why I'm going to continue to do this?
Obviously that being one of them, and the experience that someone, basically what you see on their face from their experience, the smile that they have, and they just can't take it off their face, is hard to replace. You don't really see that elsewhere. And that's that keeps me going. And, after a trip, we come back on Sunday night, you get back super late, come back into work on Monday morning, but that's what gives you that drive to come in the next day is, man, that was such a wonderful experience. And those, 15 students, they all had such a remarkable experience, and they fill out evaluations and give us feedback, but to me, actually seeing what they have the opportunity to learn and do on those trips is more rewarding than seeing what they write on paper. Their smiles and their energy is what keeps me going.
So we've talked about all the great aspects, but I'm sure there are big challenges too. So what are some of those challenges that you face when you bring these people outdoors?
Sometimes it's hard to control who is coming on these trips. So sometimes you have individuals that have a skill set that far surpasses others or is significantly lower than others, whether it's a possible disability or just the lack of enthusiasm or energy to do said activity. I'd say that's definitely one of the challenges with that. And we're limited to how much we can travel based on when people are in school. So we don't want them to miss class to go on a trip. That's kind of that's why they're here. And so it limits what we can do. And in Florida, we're also limited to primitive opportunities. So there's very few places, so Ocala National Forest, the Everglades, parts of the Panhandle, that you can actually have a real primitive experience where they don't see anyone else for a little while. And I think that's where you're going to gain even more. So we have to go out of state sometimes, or to one of those areas for people to have that type of experience where they don't have bathrooms. There's not a car within 2 miles, 5 miles of them. So that's, I definitely say, one of the challenges. And working with students, you always have turnover. Someone's graduating, which is great and wonderful. You see them move into whether it's the industry or they're an engineer now, or elementary teacher or a nurse, and you're seeing them take those transferable skills that you've taught them into that industry. It's really exciting to see, but it is challenging to know that you have turnover every semester of staff and have to retrain new staff. Where there's excitement that comes to that, it is challenging to consistently be training new people in. You get someone to the point where, wow, this person has everything together. They know exactly what they're doing, and then they graduate in 3 weeks. You're like, dang, off to the next person. But again, pros and cons to that as well, because now we have the opportunity to touch so many more students than just have 10 that stay with us for 10 years. What
would you like to see in the future for your program? Where would you like to see this develop?
I would love to have an academic program. So UCF have a minor of outdoor recreation or adventure leadership or something like that, where, again, the avenue is teaching outside. There's been a lot of studies that have shown people with ADHD, ADD, that have some type of outdoor experience, they're able to focus better when actually learning. So there's a lot of schools, private schools, that will have some type of run or bike ride in the morning and then put them in the classroom because they learn better. There's a lot of people that do surfing before they go into work, and it helps them focus that. So, I think that would help a lot of students. A lot of students have different learning disabilities, and it would also help kind of fuel our program a bit more and have more people have an understanding of what it is, what we do. And we're still educating again, but it's just a different avenue of getting across to students.
It's funny because when we originally set this up, we thought we were going to spend a lot of time talking about diving, surfing, and we haven't spoken about diving at all. It feels a little off topic right now, but I think maybe we'll jump over to it just briefly to see if it connects to everything. you are a diver.
I do
right?
dive, yes.
So what brought you into that? We know your dad got you surfing, and your dad got you teaching people to surf.
Yeah.
Is he the one that got you into the ocean underneath it as well?
I think both my parents. My mom's an educator. She was a teacher for many, many years. But she and my dad both dove together in college, and my mom really thought it was something that I would enjoy. She saw how much I love the ocean, and so maybe I was 16, and I got certified with a good friend of mine that was a family friend. Yeah, I loved it. It's hard to keep up with and do as consistently as surfing just because of the cost associated with it. It's a pretty surreal experience being under the water that you were just surfing on top of and realizing all the life that's underneath it. It's pretty amazing.
Do you bring students diving as well, or is that too restrictive, too expensive, too involved?
We do. I am not a dive master, so we have someone that we utilize here in the Orlando area that has certifications for us. So he hosts them for our program once a month. We have students go through that, and we do a couple dive trips. They are expensive, and it's harder for us to offset those costs, so we don't offer them as frequently as other trips just because of the cost associated with them. But we do have a lot of students that, Florida's a great place for diving, so we have a lot of students that absolutely love it, and I'd say our signups are pretty full pretty regularly for SCUBA.
So what are some of the places that you go regularly or have gone that particularly stand out in your mind as a special place under the ocean?
West Palm was one of the first places, and I've been a handful of times there. It was the first place I saw an octopus, which was really cool, which I didn't know that they even really lived there because I thought they liked the cooler water a bit more. That was just an insane experience. The Keys, dove quite a few places in the Keys. The Dry Tortugas, beautiful place. Crystal clear water is where it's at for me. And like I said, the east coast of Florida, which is where West Palm is, the visibility can be hit or miss at times, but it's a beautiful spot. And I prefer shallow dives over deeper dives because I have issues equalizing. But yeah, I guess the place that stands out the most, when I went to Brazil surfing there, we also went diving, and we had a sea turtle that just kind of followed us everywhere we went, which was a pretty cool experience.
It became your little friend.
It did. It was no matter where we went, this thing was swimming with us. So it was neat. It was a beautiful place to dive. There was tons of coral to look at and just wildlife that had been untouched, which is the neater part, because unfortunately a lot of the places in the Keys, the coral is either dying or has been affected by people. So it was neat in Brazil because it was pretty untouched.
You mentioned issues equalizing, and some people might not understand what that means. It's basically just clearing the airspace in your sinuses, which is an issue for me as well, because even right now I'm having sinus and allergy issues the last few days. Eric and I were diving in Belize last year,
wow.
But I was having those issues equalizing, and it was the deepest we had ever gone. We're open water certified, so technically we're not supposed to go below 60, right? And we ended up down to 80 or something.
Wow.
When I surfaced, everything in my sinuses poured directly into my mask. It was the most disgusting thing because half of my mask was full of sinus fluid, but it was probably the clearest they have ever been for those moments afterwards. So I share those difficulties equalizing as well, and completely understand what you mean about kind of preferring shallower depths.
Yeah.
Because it gets kind of painful once you get down low, and then that pressure is there in your sinuses. I could definitely tell the difference between 70 feet and 60 feet. Yeah,
you really can. And it's, one of my dive buddies just has zero problems equalizing and is always waiting for me. And I'm like, sorry, I'm coming. I'll be there in a little bit. It definitely takes me so much longer, but hey, it's worth it in the long run. And I typically don't have problems until I hit about 35, 40 feet, and then I'm a much slower. But the view's always worth it.
Yeah, what are some of the things that you see down there? It really is like an alien world. It's so different from life on land.
It is, and it's neat that you're one of the few, in a sense, to be able to experience it. I've seen some really large brain coral, fan coral, of course barracuda, that just kind of stare at you awkwardly. We've seen sharks, reef shark, black tips, the octopus. Yeah, so many different species of starfish, urchins, anemone, eel. There's so much life down there that you see in Finding Nemo, right? And
it's just like Finding Nemo, people.
Yeah, but they did such a good job with so many of the aspects of it. The barracuda that's just lingering out there, and it's that's what they do. They just stare at you and linger awkwardly with their teeth looking at you. It's a beautiful world. underneath the water, and there's so much, and you can just hear everything kind of crackling underneath, and it just kind of goes with the current. You see, tons of jellyfish. It's just neat how life underwater exists and how that the ecosystem is so fragile down there. But it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen is being underwater.
So you mentioned how cold it is in California, and I know that you've surfed out there, and you mentioned the kelp.
Yep.
So have you done any diving out in the
I
kelp?
haven't. I have not done any diving in California. I need to. I have a good friend that lives out there that dives a heck of a lot more than I do. I need to go out there. The kelp is not, it's a little weird for me.
It's interesting, though, because, so visibility, you're talking about visibility cannot be great out here. Well, it's really not great there.
Right.
But the kelp, it almost feels like you're swimming through some sort of weird forest.
Yeah.
And so it's actually really cool. And it's probably less weird when you're in amongst it versus above it and it just grabbing at you.
Right. Yeah, I feel like you said, that would be kind of a neat experience of instead of walking through a forest, you're kind of swimming through it. But when you first fall in from a wave and you're not expecting it, it is like,
right.
What a panic. Oh my gosh, what is this? It's grabbing my feet. But yeah, I'd love to dive out there. I've, heard it's beautiful and seen some of the photos that my friend lives out there has taken, and it looks awesome.
Yeah, because when we got certified, that's where we got certified, was in California and in kelp forest. Mm-hmm. So when we went diving in warmer waters, it was interesting because suddenly the visibility was so much wider, and then just the space was so much wider because we were in these confined to little kelp beds swimming through things, and suddenly just in all directions the water goes out and there's nothing impeding your view.
Right. Wow. Yeah, I need to get out there. Next trip, right?
Right. So we'll jump back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier with your program here, and we'll probably go ahead and start wrapping up. Is there anything that you would want to share to people who are listening who maybe have thought like, oh, I'm interested in some sort of program like that. Maybe my university has it, or maybe I can not in a university and I could look elsewhere. Is there any advice you'd have to those people who hear about that and either want to get involved because they'd want to be a participant or because they'd like to help out or become some sort of educator?
I think, one of the things we noticed here is just people don't know about it, and if they do, they're apprehensive because they've never done it before, or they might have gone once and had a bad experience. Their tent leaked or something like that. All of us have had those experiences is what I would share. All of us have had goof ups where we've forgotten something critical or broke something that was essential, and we all started from ground zero. So I think the biggest piece of advice is give it a shot and ask, because all of us have been in the same spot that you've been. No one's an expert at everything, so you won't find anyone that can say, I know all. And if they do, then, let them keep thinking that.
Maybe avoid them.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe avoid them. But yeah, just keeping that in mind is don't be afraid to ask the question or say, hey, this is something I've been interested in, I've never done it, so I'm a little nervous. And that's what we find a lot here is people are nervous. It's kind of that natural fear of not knowing something. Because people want to feel that they know everything and confident. But again, we've all been there and had to learn some way, shape, or form. So go out, ask the question. If you have a university that's close by, ask if they have an outdoor program. And if you're not part of one, ask a local outfitter. A lot of the local outfitters, REI is really big with it. We'll do different types of clinics or things like that. And sometimes even the universities are open to people of the community coming in and helping out. So, and we're always open to looking for new staff. So just ask the question. You
mentioned some people having a bad experience. That is one of those things that can keep people away if they come and their first experience is a bad one or what they perceive to be a bad one. What do you do in those situations? Have you figured out some sort of plan on like, oh no, I can tell this person, we might lose this person. They're not enjoying this, and they're going to convince themselves this isn't for me.
Sure. And you have those people that, I don't want to sleep on the ground. I had a really awful night's sleep last night. My sleeping pad deflated, or whatever that might be. Find something else small that for them to be able to celebrate, whether that's them being in charge of map and compass duty the next day. It's something that they can celebrate that they are really good at. And it will typically take their mind off of that one small thing that didn't go so well for them. A good breakfast and a good dessert are always my cure for bad night's sleep or something like that, and that typically will help.
Something I've noticed, this may seem like a weird analogy at first, but hear me out. Something I've noticed is that with food, when you try food that is different than what you're used to eating, say some foreign food or something, your palate is not accustomed to it. So your first inclination is that it tastes so drastically different that you don't like it.
Right.
It's almost like a disgust. And then the next time you try it, it doesn't taste as strong. And then by the third or fourth time, you can kind of decide whether you like it or not. So I feel like sometimes with the outdoors, you kind of have to develop a palate as well. You have to give it a few chances before you decide, oh, this isn't for me, or maybe this part isn't for me, but maybe something else is.
I absolutely agree. To be honest, the first time I ever went camping, I hated it. There was bugs, and I wasn't a fan of them. I was afraid they were going to crawl all up on me while I was sleeping at night, and I was uncomfortable when I slept. I was a really picky eater and still am a pretty picky eater and didn't like what was for dinner. And yeah, my first experience was not great. And a good friend of mine talked me into going on another camping trip. And I was like, well, this is a bit better this time. You know, we had a fire and just, again, really good conversation with good people. And so I was one of those people that had a bad first experience and kept trying it, and I loved it. You know, it does. It's exactly right. I think it takes sometimes a little bit of time if your first experience might not have been that great to develop. And maybe it wasn't the right thing for you. You know, maybe you tried climbing and you're like, you know, heights are not my thing, but try, you know, paddling, kayaking, canoeing, rafting, something like that, because that might be your cup of tea over a rock climbing or caving experience or something like that.
If people want to get involved either with you or something similar, are there any websites you'd like to recommend, or even just personal websites that you think might be valuable for people listening?
Yeah, I actually used to write a little bit for a company called Roots Rated. It's a newish company, and they have a website as well as an app that if you want to find a cool local place to do something in your neck of the woods, you can go to their app and say, hey, I want to go biking, and it gives you quite a few cool places to bike. So that's a great way to get involved. And I think REI, if you're newer with it and want to learn, REI is all over the country, and so they have a lot of outdoor schools that are geared beginner, intermediate, advanced kind of thing. So I think that they're a great opportunity. And then if you're involved with any university or college, typically if you type in outdoor recreation in whatever university you're at, typically you can find something at the university to get involved with.
Thankfully we have the internet now, and you can find whatever you want if you just take the time to search enough terms.
Absolutely. Much easier now.
Are there any final thoughts you'd like to leave people with before we go?
I just think get involved. Like we talked about before, if it's something that you haven't done before or had a bad experience, just ask the question. All of us have been in your shoes before, so don't be apprehensive to ask.
Okay, well, I think that'll do it.
Awesome.
So thanks for meeting me here. Thanks for sitting down.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So hopefully Jenn has convinced you that there is more to Florida than Disney World and face-eating drug addicts. If you'd like to keep up with what Jenn is up to, or if you'd like to look into some of the things that we discussed today, now is that time. Run over to the website, gogetoutside.com/podcast. Look for this, episode 46 with Jenn Velie, and there you will find photographs and links to her Instagram page, links to the UCF Outdoor Adventure Program, links to the Roots Rated website that we discussed, and to the REI Outdoor School. And while you are perusing the World Wide Web, why not drop us a line here at the show? Let us know what you think. Let us know what you like, what you don't like. You can do that by sending us an email, go@butcherbirdstudios.com, or maybe you'd rather give us a call and leave a voicemail at 818-925-0106. And if I haven't asked you to do enough things already, why don't you run over to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get this podcast? Make sure you're subscribed to the show, rate the show, review the show, and if you'd like to do us a big favor, share the show with someone who you think might appreciate it. I'd like to make a quick shout out to past show guest Alan Gigax. He was the hiking mailman in Vegas back on episode 37. I want to congratulate him for winning $20,000 on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And if you are a returning listener to the show, you've probably heard me speaking about this road trip Erica and I were on. As a matter of fact, this episode was recorded during that road trip. Well, the videos that we were putting together for portable power company Tilt have been completed. I delivered the final video earlier today, and as soon as I know a definitive release date, I will announce it here on the show. So keep listening. By the next episode, I probably will be able to tell you where and when you'll be able to check out those videos. Next time on the show, Dan Sedlacek. He's a thru hiker. He has hiked the entire Pacific Crest Trail, and he is the founder of Uphill Designs, a backpack and walking stick company located in Seattle, Washington. So come back February 16th and hear all about hiking ridiculous distances and the challenges of running an outdoor backpack company. See you then.
Woo!